for the rest of the war.
Right. And you're just telling...
And I'm just telling this story.
Right.
I can end it with the escape of the Alabama, but that leaves my characters kind of unfulfilled because what they've been trying to do for the whole book is prevent that from happening. So in the end, or at that end, they lose. Now, a few months later, they win big, but it has less to do with the story I've been telling,
okay,
than the fallout from that story affecting other events elsewhere.
I have a tool for that, if you are interested, that I use in my book coaching when my clients are trying to decide where and how to end their story arc. So
well, that's why I mentioned to you at some point here, I may need to hire you for your services because I have several ideas. One is just to end it where it ends, but have it be a personal arc for the main characters.
right,
So even though the events are against them, they reach a character-driven point,
right,
which is actually pretty valid.
right,
The events that occur afterwards involve stymieing their enemies in a very big way, but that doesn't happen for another several months and involves other things that aren't directly related to what's happening in the story right now.
right, right.
And going there seems like too much of a divergence.
Does seem like it would go a bit beyond, yeah.
Yeah. So I need to figure out I have a very good idea for a climax
Good.
that involves the escape of the ship and events circulating around a couple of main characters. And then what I'm struggling with is how to do that in a character-driven way, not an event-driven way.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I want to see this thing done. I want to see what it looks like. We've been talking about it for a while.
Yeah.
You've been working on it for a while, so I'm pretty excited about it. So what else would you like to talk about tonight? You got any other hot topics that you want to talk about?
Hot topics.
And I don't mean that store. Does that even exist anymore? I don't even
Not
know.
that I've seen. I want to talk about what you do with your book coaching, and not so much in the sense of how you take your clients through it, but where you see yourself in their efforts. Am I making myself clear?
Yeah. So the reason that I do the book coaching and the editing is because I love the work. And the joy for me is being that supportive mechanism that helps the writer get what they're trying to do out on the page in a way that is meaningful to them, but accessible to the reader as well. So and engaging, right? Emotionally engaging. It's a story that you want to spend time with. I'm always talking about how reading a book is a lot like going on a road trip. And who do you want to get in the car with? And, who's the driver? And you want to make sure that character who's driving the car is interesting enough. They don't have to be likable. That's that whole the good, the bad, and the unlikable, right? They don't have to necessarily be likable. They can even be ambiguous. There's a lot of range for characters. They just have to be interesting enough and accessible to the reader in a way that will engage the reader and keep them reading, right? Their story just needs to be meaningful. And what happens is that a lot of times as writers, especially early on, writers have these great ideas. They have these great, stories they want to tell, but getting it from the heart and the head and out onto the page in a way that is meaningful to the reader is where they trip up. Right? They don't have the craft for it. They don't have the background for it, or they can't see what they're missing themselves. That's a big component. So the consistency, continuity, character arc, they don't know what's missing because what's in their head, is in their head, and it may not be on the page. So that's a big piece of it. So getting it out of the heart and head and onto the page in a way that's meaningful and accessible to readers, that is a huge part of what I do. And I have a lot of different tools to do that with that depends on who the writer is and what their issue is and what they're struggling with. Those are the tools that I'll engage or I'll offer up and walk them through, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I also, sometimes writers just need to know that, yes, they can. Yes, they can. They can do this, and it's meaningful, and they have a story to tell, and that it's unique, and theirs is the only lens through which perhaps this particular story can or will be told. And that's another thing. But I'll be honest with you, there are moments when it's okay for a writer to decide that maybe they don't want to. They get to the point with this work, when you're working with them as a book coach, and they'll realize that either one, they're not prepared to tell this story. They can't dig deep enough, or it's too personal, or it's too complicated, or it's really not turning out to be what they thought it was going to be. Or they just need permission to not do this anymore because they thought writing a book would be all that, and it's just turning out to not be the thing they really wanted to do.
It's not all that. Sometimes it's a lot of just grind.
Right. So
I guess what I was driving at is, I understand that you feel that you do that. Mm-hmm. Are there times when you have to say, for instance, like you said, yes, you can. Like writer just, yes, this actually is a good story. I'm giving you permission to keep telling this story because it really is a good story. When the writer may have doubts, or quite the opposite. It's like, yeah, I know this is important to you, but we don't really need a slice of life. You know.
That's usually about craft, though. That usually comes down to, the story you're trying to tell. Is it coming across in a way that, again, is accessible and engaging to readers? You may think it's this is the funniest thing that ever happened, but if it's falling flat on the page, it's not going to go anywhere. I liken it to, let's go back to my Navy background. Just a little bit. Let's go way back in time.
Perhaps the Wayback Machine.
Because way back. But I equate it to the writer being a transmitter, the reader being a receiver. And I was an electronics technician, so I did transmitters and receivers, and that was my job. And when you are, the transmitter takes the signal and or the sound and turns it into a signal, bounces it around in an antenna, sends it across the world, and when it gets there, it goes through an antenna, goes back into a receiver that has to then take that apart and turn it back into sound. Well, a book is like that. A book is like that transmitter receiver thing, that the mechanism that gets that information from the writer's head and heart into the reader's head and heart. And there's a lot of brain science behind how we read and all of that, as I'm sure you know. But that's really what it comes down to, is making it work in a way that that tool or that mechanism is really rocking and it's working. And there's no guarantee that every reader is going to come with their, because they're going to come with their own lens. So you're not going to reach every reader. But if you can make it accessible enough to your target audience or your target reader, then you're doing your job. And my job is to interpret that and just, help you to see when and where you are successful and when and where you're not being so successful. And I've sent writers back to the drawing board to get more craft, or I've sent them resources so that they can learn to do a better job with certain aspects of craft, because sometimes they just don't have the chops yet to tell the story they want to tell.
Yeah, craft for me has always been more seat of the pants instinct than a learned effort, which is why I sometimes have serious doubts about my craft. I can discuss it, and when I look at what you do in terms of helping authors, say, oh yeah, I sort of knew that. I don't know why I knew that, but I sort of knew that. And it's reinforcing for me, and not having engaged your services, but to listen to you talk about how you do that process and some of the things you've recommended in terms of resources, books to read or blogs to read about craft, that I found very interesting. I don't know that I gained any dramatic insights. It's more a confirmation that, oh, okay,
Well,
I see how you do that.
Yeah.
I can do that.
well, it goes back to that I tell people all the time that I learn as I always learn and relearn as I teach, as I coach. I'm internalizing all of that information, especially if I have to learn a different way to articulate it or a different tool to use for a different author because their brain works a little different or the way that they're coming at the story is a little different. So I have to find a new way to articulate it or another tool for them to use to really understand it. My goal is to level them up craft wise. You walk in the door, you work with me. When you walk out of the door, I want you to be leveled up as a writer. I want you to have learned the craft and internalized the craft, or at least have me as the voice in your head saying, you might want to get some emotion on the page there. So,
Oh, gee, where have I heard that before? And that's what's always kind of fascinated me about the writing process and what we call craft. Mm-hmm. I know a number of would-be writers that I work with or that I talk to. Oh, I want to write a book. It's like, okay, do you have a clue as to what this is about? And some of them do. Some of them really just have no idea what they're getting into or what they need to even make a start.
Well, and part of that is it goes back to the fact that we all went to school and learned how to write a sentence, more or less. We all learned to write, more or less. We didn't learn how to write a novel. We didn't learn how to write fiction necessarily, or we didn't learn how to write an engaging story, but we learned how to write. And so there's a part of us that thinks, oh, well, I can write a book because I know how to write. Most people, even if they finger painted in school, will tell you, I'm not an artist. I don't know how to paint. But they all finger painted in school. Well, this is basically the same kind of thing, except for because we all wrote something and we had to write papers or we had to write essay answers or whatever, we all think we can write. And there's writing and there's writing.
I'm trying to convince one of my colleagues that there's a distinct difference between writing a scientific paper, of which he has written many, and writing a thriller.
Well, academic writing.
And it's like, these are very different fields of writing.
Academic writing, technical writing, scientific writing, those are all very specific and they require a certain type of approach and certain focus. And so does fiction, and especially genre fiction, because there are certain things that are required to satisfy the reader. And people don't understand that coming in the door. It's just like I hear all the time from people, oh, I'm going to write a picture book because they're easy. Well, they're not.
I would never even attempt one because I know they're not.
They're not. But that's because you've been exposed to the world of writing. Most people think, oh, it's just 500 words. How hard can it be? It's for kids. It's for kids. How hard can it be? And there's a lot of craft that goes into writing for kids. And so, again, writing for kids is very different, too, than writing for adults. And writing picture books is very different than writing graphic novels, is very different than screenwriting, is very, so.
Yes. And I would invite anybody who thinks it's easy to pick up a really well-written children's book. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's the thing that kind of fascinates me sometimes, because I can look at that and recognize, oh, my goodness, how did you do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
There are some people really just don't.
Amazing.
And I mean, I will pull even isolated sentences out of otherwise forgettable books and go, this sentence is too good to belong in this book.
Yeah, that happens.
My son and I have a game about either scenes or movie lines that are too good for that movie.
Nice.
Like, no, you don't belong here. You're too good.
Where did that come
for this
from?
Piece of crap.
Yeah. Well, so basically, that's what I do, and the joy of it for me is helping authors be successful, helping writers to achieve their goals, whatever those goals are, or get closer to them during their time with me. So, yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. Thanks for
Nicely
asking. Well, I guess that's about it for us tonight. But I
think we have exhausted ourselves here, as we usually do.
But it's I always enjoy our time together, Bruce.
Oh, so do
always
I.
enjoy.
This is a bright spot in my month. So we will close this out. Thank you again for listening to this edition of the Brick Cave podcast. Anytime you would like to hear us, current issues or back issues, join us online at brickcavepodcast.com. Our BC Book Club members can enjoy extra episodes and other great advantages such as
Free books.
Details on the Brick Cave website, brickcave.media. And thank you again, everybody, for listening. We'll drop in again soon.
Bye.
Bye.